Hey, this is Support Carry Zilean, and today I want to talk about the state of Support Zilean in patch 8.2. We're going to start off by talking about the pro meta, moving into how that changes from the solo queue meta. We're going to go over some support item changes, and then how the item builds are going to be changed in this patch. Okay, first let's talk about the pro meta. First off, Protect the AD Carry is the professional meta where you often see double tanks and triple tanks. And in this meta, Zilean does perform quite well, and you can even see that Kasing from, I believe, Vitality picked Zilean support, and I do believe that they did win that game, and he did a build very similar to mine where you maxed the slow first, and then build Ardent Sensor, and then you also get kind of the Stoneborn Pact Ardent Sensor combination for the two. And it's going to be even stronger in 8.2, and that's just because hyper carries are going to be much more prolific. So you will see him being paired well with Caitlyn, Kog'Maw, and Jinx if teams decide to pick him up. He does have a high skill cap, so you might not see it very often. Another reason is that the lanes are very safe right now, even after the Runic Shield meta, moving into the Spellbook meta. And so since Zilean's weakest point is the early game, the passivity makes it easy to transition into the mid game so you can focus on utility without being punished too much. Moving on to the solo queue meta, we're going to talk about which ADCs have been popping up a lot more in solo queue. So you've been seeing more Jinxes, more Kog'Maws, and Vayne to a degree, and they're basically used to combat the hyper tanks, or the Sejuanis in the jungle, just something very slow and immobile that does a ton of damage to things that get close to it. And so as Zilean, we want our AD carries that we like facing AD carries and supporting AD carries that are slow, they don't have gap closers, but do a ton of damage, so you're not reliant on Zilean's damage to be a big factor in combat. The things that we don't like to lane against are poke champions and super mobile AD carries, and that's just because they can dodge a lot of our skills with quick succession, so you end up wasting mana and not really doing very much. And also, you're seeing people are moving away from poke supports, and that's just because when they remove Frost Queen's claim, it's no longer the AD or supports don't really get a lot of AP poke. So you just don't see them much anymore. So it's mostly sustained supports and tank supports, very few poke supports. Right now I am Platinum 4, and he does very well in my elo, which is good. So he's pretty viable, I'd say ranging from silver to diamond. Bronze, I'm not sure how effective he'll be because he does require some amount of team synergy, and bronze games tend to just go off on their own. Next, let's talk about the support item changes. So the big takeaways are that supports have a higher income in the early game, but they are much less durable because you no longer get a nice boost of HP by just picking up a Sightstone. So your first item is almost always going to be Spellthief's Edge. You don't really go coin unless you really don't want to do anything in the early game except just survive. And even then, I'd still say Spellthief is better because it keeps enemies honest. And so they can't just run away with lane. They'll still have to use their potions and stuff like that. So when you go to base and you make your decision of what do I want to upgrade first, do I want to go buy a mana item? Do I want to go upgrade my Frostfang? Do I want to start building more durability? Generally, Frostfang is going to be your first item upgrade, but it is not the most mandatory. You can still buy tier if you are more familiar or comfortable with that. But I do say that tier does have some issues in the mid to late game where you just run out of item slots. So tier is okay if you do have mana issues. I do prefer going Lost Chapter if you are building AP damage, or Forbidden Idol if you are doing more of the traditional support Enchantress role. And when you do pick up your Frostfang, it is changed a little bit now, so that once you hit your 500 stacks, it automatically rolls over to Sightstone, the Sightstone variant with one ward, so you can pick up, or you can swap your Trinket out at around 400 gold, so that way you'll have your Sweeper up and ready by the time your Frostfang kicks over. The support item changes do change the dynamic of bot lane, but it's mostly the same as before. The big difference is there's going to be less health in the bottom lane because you no longer are having that early sight stone or that level 6 to level 8 sight stone. So it does make it a little bit more volatile in that 3v2 ganks are much more potent. So just keep an eye out for that. Now let's move on to the item build changes. Let's see here. Upgrading your Frostfang into the Eye of the Watchers is now kind of a luxury choice. You don't necessarily have to do it. Most of my games that I've been playing, I have not been upgrading my sights or the Frostfang any further than just the necessary way. And that's just because you're paying 650 gold for one extra ward and just 15 AP and a little bit of health. So it's not the most important upgrade you can get. You can stick around with just the Frostfang and be fine. The reason you would upgrade it in the past is because for item slot efficiency, where you would free up 2 item slots by just upgrading this one item. So now that you don't have to make that decision anymore, most of the time you just don't upgrade it until you really need it, which is closer to the end of the mid game, I'd say. When you've completed, I'd say 2 or 3 items, then that's probably the right time to upgrade it. Tier builds tend to be a little bit awkward in the late game, and I went over this earlier, and that's just because the upgrade price is around 2,300 gold, and then it also takes a needlessly large rod. So these are items that are going to stick around in your inventory and just kind of take space, or if you want to just buy it straight outright, it's much harder to do so. So I tend not to go tier anymore, and that's just because it's awkward. In some of the games where I tested it out, I ended up just selling the tier when I didn't have any mana problems in the mid-late game, because I just needed to have an adaptable item such as a Locket of the Iron Solari, possibly even a Banner of Command if we're going up against tanks and a lot of AP threats. So there's two differences there's two basically builds right now for Zilean, which is utility and damage. The utility scales better for AD carries and team fightings, but the damage is better if you just completely destroy the lane, if they don't have any tanks, or you lack an AP damage threat. And if they don't have, if those 3 conditions, if one of them is not true, then it's more than often utility is going to be the better choice here. But not taking into account how much fun you're going to have, but the probability of winning the game is going to be higher by just going utility in most situations. But there are those caveats where if they don't have tanks and if your team lacks an AP damage threat, that's when I would say it is okay to go more damage here. So let's talk about the mastery changes. We're going to talk about the primary here. So the mastery's been getting nerfed like pretty consistently for the past, since they came out. So right now for utility choice, Airy is good. Comet is also really good, and the Unsealed Spellbook is just alright. It's kind of a fallback. So you want to use Airy if you're going to be more utility focused, and then that's just because whenever you cast your Time Warp on them, they do get that little shield. And then that also works with Athene's Unholy Grail as well as Ardent Censer. So just some more utility synergy there. Arcane Comet is good for damage, and that's just if you just want to keep poking out your lane or build into damage. If you land a double bomb, it's very consistent that the bullet does hit. And even when you do single bombs to harass, there's a pretty high chance that if they don't have boots, the Comet will land. And that's just because they have to keep running even after the spell lands. So they get out of position and step away from the wave. And so Spellbook, the final one, the only reason I would think that you would want Spellbook is if you don't anticipate needing Exhaust for your team fights. And then you could switch it out for Teleport, I'd say. But really, if you're not going to change your summoner spells, there's not much of a reason to pick up the Spellbook. The extra cooldown reduction on your summoners is okay, but I feel you're not getting the most out of it if you aren't swapping your summoner spells every so often. So let's move on to the secondaries here. We'll just go down the list here. For sorcery, right now I believe Mana Flow Band is better than Ultimate Hat. So Mana Flow Band gives you more mana during lane and all throughout the game. The Ultimate Hat turns on when you hit level 6, and when you're at full cooldown at max level with max CDR, you really only save about 4 seconds on your ultimate, which brings it down to, I believe, 28 or 29 seconds. As opposed to 33 if you have your extra 5% CDR mastery, and then 36 if it's just 40% cooldown reduction. So it's a small amount, but you just have to consider how long are these team fights going to go. Are you going to need an ultimate every 30 seconds? Do you need one every 40 seconds? Because at late game aces, the death timers are so long that if you just get one off and you ace the team, you're not going to be needing the 10 seconds off your cooldown, just because there's no reason. Like, they're not going to be dead, or they're not going to be alive for the next 30 seconds. So it just seems a little bit, it just seems like a win more talent. So that's why I don't like it. Mana Flow is just much more consistent. It helps you through laning, and even later in the game it does kick back a bit more mana. So moving into domination, there's Zombie Ward and Ingenious Hunter, and that's just because it helps out your active items. That's more focused on utility if you're buying a Redemption or a Locket. I recommend buying or going into this talent tree, and that's just because Zombie Ward gives you so much vision control, and Ingenious Hunter does really help out, get more Locket activations, get more Redemption activations. Your sweeper is on a much lower cooldown, so there's all sorts of benefits for just going with that one. The next one is Inspiration, which has been very popular as of late. There are basically 4 talents that you can choose from here. You just pick your favorites. From the top one, it's Stopwatch, which is kind of the flavor of the month. I expect that to be changed a little bit. If you're good using Locket, great. If not, then just don't bother with Stopwatch. Zilean's ult does a pretty good job of just working around the Stopwatch. So basically just a net 120 gold for one time. Moving down one tree, you have Future Dead or the Free Boots. I've been tending to go Future Dead, and that just is because it helps you complete your items a little bit faster. And so you can go into debt by just a little bit, and that's fine. Just be careful not to go into too much debt when you're building components and pieces. Generally, you want to save them for fully completed items, and that's just so you don't keep setting yourself too far behind. So don't always go into future debt. Just be kind of mindful. And if you do go into debt, you want to max out. So if you only spent 100 of your future debt, be sure to pick up a pink ward and then an extra potion, and you should be good. The boots are okay. It just saves you like 550, 560 gold. It helps the cost reduce it. Of all these, I think it is the most cost efficient of all the masteries. So it's up to you. A lot of people are sleeping on it, and it's future debt's pretty good. The final one is the 5% CDR to all. It's your choice depending on how you play. I tend to always, if I'm in the inspiration tree, I will always take this on Zilean, and that's just because you get a little bit more of everything. You have more CDR for lane, more item CDR, more summoner CDR. So it just helps get around. And another reason why I don't like Stopwatch is that it only builds into Zhonya's for the support, or in the support in the AP build, and that's a very expensive item, and it's not often that Zilean wants to buy it. Alright, moving to the last tree, we're not going to talk about precision because Zilean doesn't use it. This is the resolve tree. Your best choices are going to be Font of Life and Second Wind. If you are going to play utility, this is kind of the way you want to go. This is a solid tree, or these are solid picks if you are going to be easing into the mid game versus hard lanes, if you're against a very poke heavy lane, or against like a Caitlyn or something. The second one does help alleviate some of the damage that she does, especially if you don't want to use potions. It does help a lot. So in conclusion, if I had to rate Zilean this patch right now, I would give him a B+. He's in a pretty good spot. If you have a lot of games on him and you understand the core mechanics, you're going to be doing a lot better. the item changes do help advance the build much quicker, so you are able to hit those utility power spikes or those damage power spikes, depending on how you go, much quicker. And so you'll have more of an impact in the game rather than kind of sitting around for 15 minutes just tossing wards out and looking for picks and stuff. Also, the semi-passive meta with hyper carries and hyper tanks does help you get to mid-game without just losing the lane completely and being pretty far behind. Right now it's very easy to go even in lane as Zilean, very easy to get ahead in lane just a little bit. So this kind of passive AD carry meta, passive support, it is very, very hospitable for Zilean. Yeah, and so that's all I have for you right now. We'll be back in 8.3 and we'll figure it out. Thank you and have a good one.